Whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Lepore. I am the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is Wednesday, January 17th, 2018, and this is the first and only scheduled stakeholder meeting for the Oil and Gas Commission's rulemaking concerning the charge imposed on the value of oil and gas produced in the state, commonly referred to as the levy. Thanks for being here. Sorry for the delayed start. We have some technical difficulties. I pretty much can promise you we'll still get you out of here before 11. I'm going to walk through a little bit the history of the rulemaking up to this point in time, and then I am going to grill all of you with the dramatic reading of some statutory language. We noticed this rulemaking on December 15th, 2017. A notice was published in the Colorado Register on December 25th, 2017. We published an updated notice of rulemaking on some other date. January 2nd. The notice reads that the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, on its own motion, will consider additions and amendments to Rule 310 of the Commission Rules of Practice and Procedure to CCR 404-1 as part of its, quote, levy rulemaking. The primary purpose of the levy rulemaking is to increase the oil and gas conservation levy authorized by Section 3460 122(1)A Colorado Revised Statute by at least 0.4 of a mil in order to meet projected revenue shortfalls in the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund established by 3460 124 Colorado Revised Statutes. And a red line version of the rules was attached as well as a draft statement of basis and purpose. The rulemaking was originally noticed for January 28th, and the amended notice changed that hearing date to February 12th and 13th. And that is where we stand today. The hearing is expected to take place on Monday, February 12th. I want to, as I promised, read you a little statutory language, and I do that primarily because there tends to be some confusion about terminology. Apologies, hold on for 1 second while I turn my phone off. So the statutory provision that I referenced earlier, 3460 122 Colorado Revised Statutes, creates a fund and creates a way to provide revenue to that fund. And I do want to read part of that. Section 122 says, in addition to the filing and service fee required to be paid under Section 3460 106(1)F and fees authorized for other services provided by the Commission by Section 3460 106(16), there is imposed on the market value at the well of all oil and natural gas produced, saved, and sold or transported from the field where produced in this state, a charge not to exceed 1 7/10 mils on the dollar. The Commission shall, by order, fix the amount of such charge in the first instance and may, from time to time, reduce or increase the amount thereof as, in its judgment, the expenses chargeable against the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund specified in subsection 5 of this section may require. My God, I'm glad I didn't write that. in plain English, the statute authorizes the commission to impose a charge on the value of hydrocarbons produced in the state up to 1 7/10 mils, and gives the commission the authority to set the amount of that charge in a range between 0 and 1.7 mils to meet its expenses. That section also creates this thing called the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund. I'm going to refer to that fund as our cash fund. That fund has two components. I'll describe those two components in a second, but essentially the mill charge is to fund COGCC's operations. And the biggest expense in that bucket happens to be salaries. There are some other things that COGCC does, like plug and abandon orphan wells, and we use funds from something called the Environmental Response Account to do that. The Environmental Response Account is part of, or is within, the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund. So the response account is a subset of the response of the fund, the cash fund. So now I'm going to read a little bit of section 5, subsection 5 of section 122. It is the duty of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to collect all charges and penalties under this article and to remit them to the state treasurer for deposit in the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund, the big fund, the cash fund, which fund is hereby created in the state treasury. There is hereby created in the fund the Environmental Response Account, into which shall be deposited penalties pursuant to section 346121(1). Expenses authorized pursuant to section 346124(4) shall be paid in the first instance from the account. That's the Environmental Response Account. And expenses authorized pursuant to section 346124(10) shall not be paid from the account. So I'm not going to try to sort all of that language out, other than so everyone is clear. There is an Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund that I'm going to call the cash fund. And there's a subset of that called the account that has some restrictions on how it can be spent. That was a lot of background. I'm going to go back now to the notice of rulemaking in our proposed rule. It's complicated, not really. It says, this is rule 310 of the COGCC rules. And the only change to that rule that we have proposed is that the present charge imposed on the value of hydrocarbons as of the effective date of this rulemaking, currently projected to be April 1, 2018, is at least 11/10 mils to be determined at the rulemaking hearing. So, again, I'll try plain English. The current mill levy is 7/10 of a mil. It's been 7/10 of a mil since 2007. The fund that I talked about, the cash fund, has two primary sources of revenue. The mill levy is one of them, severance tax is the other. Over the years, the mill levy has been the larger source of fund, something in the neighborhood sometimes as much as 75%, usually in the range of a 65%. Mill levy, 35%, thereabouts, severance tax. At the moment, our budget, our funding, is more like 49% severance tax and 51% mill. For a variety of different reasons, the funding into both of those buckets is projected to fall far short of what our expenditures are expected to be. So the Commission's budget, if you will, that fund, that operational account fund, is about $12.5 million. That is our projected expenditures and all. For those of you in the audience, I will get to the slides in a second and show you where that is. But that's the projected amount of our expenditures. That amount has been authorized by the General Assembly. Because of the change in commodity prices over the last several years, the 7/10 charge on the value of production will not fill that mill levy bucket. We will have a sizable shortfall. In addition, because of changes to the severance tax world that I'll talk about a little bit, we don't expect the severance tax bucket to be full either. We're facing shortfalls in both of those buckets. The severance tax side has many potential solutions. Many of those solutions might come out of the legislature. One possible solution to the severance tax is also an increase in the mill rate charged, but we don't know what solution we might get out of the legislature this year. So there's uncertainty around the severance tax bucket, and some of that uncertainty is sort of out of our hands, as it were. We don't control those particular levers. We won't know, we may not know until the end of the session whether a fix, as it were, has come out of the legislature. So that contributes a little bit of uncertainty and sort of explains why at this moment in time we're staying an increase of at least 4/10 of a mil. So the 4/10 of a mil raise in the levy, in our estimation, would fill the mill levy bucket. That amount of funding that we expected to come in on the mill levy side, we will hit that number, we think, with the 4/10 of a mil raise. So again, that's why we are saying at least that 4/10. We need that 4/10 to fill the mill levy bucket. And I'll say that we also generally, easy math, each 1/10 mil increase generates about $1 million of revenue for the cash fund over the course of a year. So that's sort of a spoiler alert on the fact that if we raise 4/10 of a mil, we generate $4 million. We think we'll fill the bucket, which means that we think we will fall about $4 million short of revenue on that mill levy side if we don't raise the mill. So now I will switch to the slides, and I'm sorry we aren't able to put them on the screen, but we made copies and handed them out for those in the audience. These are the punchline for these slides are really the spreadsheets that are slides 5 and 6. But I'll walk you through the assumptions that went into these revenue projections first. So on slide number 1, after the introduction slide, we show that we are basing our revenue projections on a production rate of 10.5 million barrels per month. And we use that number because that's what we have produced in the state over the last 6 months. The last 6 months for which we have complete production data, which is April through September of 2017. We then have to attach a price to that production. And the price, as you can see there, is based on West Texas Intermediate NYMEX future prices. And we discounted those West Texas Intermediate prices by 10% to reflect local pricing. And we used an average of those prices. On slide number 3, we have gas production based on 144 BCF per month, again, based on a statewide average of last full quarter of complete production data, July through September 2017. The numbers are shown there, and that price, the price is shown based on Henry Hub NYMEX futures, discounted by 7% to reflect local prices. Two more assumptions on the next slide. One assumption is that our budget is approved by the General Assembly, and the expected expenditures for that budget are $12.5 million, as I mentioned before. And the other is that we spend all of the money that we expected to spend in fiscal year 2017-2018, which is the fiscal year that we are in right now. So those are just the assumptions, as I said, that go into the next slide, which has our current revenue forecast and shows what happens if we do not change the levy rate. So the line that I'm going to focus on is the second line up from the bottom, which says ending fund balance less restricted funds. And the way I think about this is that number is the amount of money we will have in the operational fund at the end of each fiscal year. And it's the amount of money that we will have to pay for operations in the first quarter of the subsequent fiscal year. So again, for fiscal year 17-18, where we are today, if you look at the ending fund balance, it's $2.66 million. Go one column to the right and see what we think we would have at the end of the next fiscal year, and we're in the hole. We have a negative balance. We would start the year with a deficit of $300,000, which makes it hard to pay for the operations in the first quarter of 2020. And if you continue to the right, you see that that deficit grows dramatically year over year. By 2021, if we don't change the mill levy, we would project to be in the hole by $7.5 million, which makes it really hard to keep the lights on. I can go through, let's go up a few lines to the line that says total expenditures. And again, I fundamentally think of that as our budget. That is the projected amount of money we need to spend to fund all of our operations on an annual basis. And so our, although it says forecast, I think, well, it is forecast because we're not to the end of 17-18 yet, but in the forecast for fiscal year 17-18, we expect to spend $11.76 million. And in the following year, we expect to spend $12.5 million. Another thing worth pointing out, so two columns below that, we have the ending fund balance. And this is important to understand. What's most important to understand here is that not all of the money in that ending fund balance can be used to pay for operations. And this gets us back to that environmental response account. So some of the money that we count in the ending fund balance is restricted dollars, are restricted dollars. An example is penalty fees that we collect. Those penalty fees go into the big account. We have to count them, but we can't spend those to pay salaries. The things for which we could spend penalties are restricted based on statute. So you see underneath ending fund balance, the restricted funds, we back those out because we can't use those to pay for operations. That's how we get to the ending fund balance less restricted funds, which again is really the amount of money in the bank to keep the lights on in the first quarter of the subsequent fiscal year. Okay, so you can see we would end with a positive Fund balance this year, we would end with a negative fund balance minus the restricted funds next year. Turn the page to the last slide, and you can see the revenue projections with the 0.4 of a mil increase. And again, if we just go to ending fund balance less restricted funds, you can see that we don't ever go into the red, and we end up with a fund balance going out time into fiscal year 1920 and 2021 of a little over $6 million. Which, to be clear, there is a statutory cap on the amount that can be in that fund balance. It is $6 million. It was raised from $4 million to $6 million a couple of years ago by a statutory change. And the reason for the $6 million is that it's roughly 50% of our operating budget, and that's sort of the safe amount to have in the bank to fund the next first quarter, again, before revenue starts to come in for the current year. Can I answer any questions about any of that part? Okay, so my summary is raising the mill by 0.4 of a mil, raising the charge by 0.4 of a mil, fills the mill levy half of our revenue stream sufficiently and takes care of that half. Again, it doesn't address the severance tax projected deficit. So let me talk a little bit about the severance tax projected deficit. And mostly I just want to talk about why we project a deficit. Severance tax is affected by the price of the commodity, so that's part one. Commodity is worth less, taxes are less, you get less tax revenue. More significant factor is that about 1.5 years ago, the Colorado Supreme Court handed down a decision called BP versus Department of Revenue, in which the court said that certain capital expenditures by oil and gas operators were in fact deductible expenses. The Department of Revenue had said they were not deductible, and therefore operators were paying tax, higher taxes than it turns out the Colorado Supreme Court decided that they needed to pay. The consequence was a refund of those excess tax dollars paid by the operators going back in time. So that decision did not just affect BP, it affected everyone who paid that tax inappropriately. And going forward, again, less tax revenue because now there's a deduction out there for those capital costs. Because of the projected amount of refunds this year, severance tax revenue is going to fall drastically short of what it was originally projected to be. So again, the severance tax, well, not again, but severance tax dollars come into the state. They are cut in half. One half goes to the Department of Regulatory Affairs. The Department of Regulatory Affairs chiefly distributes that money to local governments through a grant program. The other half of the severance tax revenue comes to the Department of Natural Resources. The department allocates that money in a variety of ways, but at a high level, it has what are called Tier 1 programs and Tier 2 programs. COGCC is a Tier 1 program. That means we get priority over the Tier 2 programs, but there are some important Tier 2 programs out there. That said, if there's not enough money to go around, it will go to the Tier 1 programs first, and the Tier 2 programs get what is left over, if anything. Current projections tell us there would not be anything at all for tier 2 programs, and that tier 1 programs would not be able to be funded at the levels that was anticipated. So there's, again, where COGCC faces the possibility of coming up short. So to recap that part, while we do expect severance tax dollars to fall short of the projected revenue that we would need, there are potential solutions via the legislature, and we don't know yet which option, which path we might go down to try to fill the severance tax bucket. One path is additional raising of the levy. By additional, I mean greater than 4/10. That said, our primary focus in this rulemaking is to fill the mill levy bucket, which would take 4/10 of a mill increase. Okay, again, I'll pause for questions.
All tier 1, if you don't have enough to fully fund all tier 1, do all the programs take an equal hit, or can you say, well, we'll fully fund these tier 1s, but not these tier 1s? Do you know how that works?
Okay, thanks. So the question was, if there is not enough severance tax funding, or revenue, I should say, to fund all tier 1 programs, does the Department of Natural Resources allocate that equally over the tier 1 programs, or can they pick and choose? Can the department pick and choose and fund one tier 1 program to a greater extent than another tier 1 program? Great question, to which I do not know the exact answer, and I don't know if Eric Nickel might.
I believe it's discretionary. It's a negotiated JVC, DNR, OSPB situation, but line by line.
So Eric Nickel, who is in our finance department here at the agency, said that he believes it is discretionary within the department's discretion in consultation with others. That is my best understanding as well, that the department doesn't have to fund everybody equally. Mike.
For your total expenditures, does that account for all the staffing that's been approved? Or does that not reflect additional staffing salaries that have been approved but not realized?
The question is, does the total expenditures line item reflect currently approved FTE for the agency, or does it include projected future hires? Did I say that correctly?
Well, I guess maybe they've been approved but not filled. So you're looking at your actual salaries versus what your budget would be for your approved salaries. That you've had approved positions, but they haven't been filled.
Okay, so I'll restate the question. The question is whether the expenditures, the total line item expenditures, reflects paying for all approved FTE, even if some of those positions are vacant today. So we actually wouldn't pay anybody because there's nobody in that position. Is that accurate? Okay. The answer to that question is it includes paying for all approved positions. So the way we talk about that is that we might have at the end of the year some vacancy savings. So all of the staff in the room know that I haven't had an executive assistant for a long time. There's some dollars allocated to pay for that position. If we don't spend them because that position remains open, we have vacancy savings. I'll answer the question that I thought you asked first. We have a decision item in the legislature to increase our flow line integrity work group by 2 FTE. And the 12.5 million total expenditures for fiscal year 18-19 do include those 2 individuals' salaries. So essentially, as we have 110.1 FTE authorized by the General Assembly right now, the budget for 18-19 would include 112.1, or some number very close to that. One other point I want to make about the rulemaking. We collect the levy charge quarterly, and there's a lag time after the end of the month before it is paid after the end of the quarter. So we noticed this rulemaking on pretty kind of short turnaround for the following reason. If the rule takes effect on April 1, the new mill applies to that last quarter of fiscal year 2017-2018. We won't see any dollars from that until September of 2018, September 1. So I have to use my fingers, but April, May, June, July, August, there's a 5-month lag time between the effective date of the rule and any increase in dollars in the door to COGCC. And on that note, I'll say, if it turns out that in this rulemaking, we raise the mill by 4/10, and then after the session, discover that the severance tax bucket didn't get filled through other possible solutions, and we need to fill it through another rulemaking, we'll probably notice another rulemaking very quickly so that we can get those dollars in the door as quickly as possible. And I have to say, because of the way the notice was written and prepared, the commission does have discretion to raise the levy by something greater than 4/10 in this rulemaking, this hearing on February 12th. That's their discretion. Any other questions on anything? If not, I'll just talk about the schedule that from going forward from here. Okay. So it is January 17th. This is our stakeholder meeting. January 22nd is the deadline to file party status requests. January 26th is the party pre-hearing statement deadline, 5-page maximum. Gentle reminder that you don't need to use the full 5 pages. February 2nd, 2018, party responses to the pre-hearing statements. February 5th, public statements. If you're not a party, but you do want to participate as a citizen of Colorado, just ask. We'll hold you to it, but we would ask that you file your statement by February 5th so the commissioners have time to receive it and consider it. And the rulemaking hearing is scheduled for February 12th. That's all I have. I thank you all for coming. And unless there are any additional questions, we will adjourn.
Is there anyone on the phone?
No one ever pinged in as far as I know. All right, thank you all.